Okay, hi everyone. So today I'm going to be going through the first investigation folio task, which is the dietary analysis. So this maximum word count of 1200 words is a suggestion. However, I'm hoping that you shouldn't go over this word count by too much because it is a suggestion based on what I expect from you to be able to analyze it in the depth that I think is required for you to get a good grade. So I'm not going to go through the prediction table because you've already should have done that. And I won't go through how to enter in your food into Chronometer because that's in a separate tutorial. But what I'm going to talk about today is how to actually structure your report for this dietary analysis. So firstly, you need to have an introduction. So for your introduction, you should have the purpose of why you would want to actually look at your food consumption. So we know that you require both macro and micronutrients and a certain amount of them every day to be able to fuel and have your body function properly. So that's one purpose. You also need to talk about why you need macro and micronutrients. So macronutrients are there as energy and they have other functions as well in your body, whereas micronutrients are there to make sure that your body functions properly. Okay, you then need to include your predicted table from part one. So this is also to do with structure as well. Moving into the results section, you should have your 9 graphs from Chronometer that I've instructed you on how to generate in the tutorial, as well as the hand-drawn graph, which I've included as an example. There are 2 examples in the weekly work. So you should have a total of 10 graphs over the 3 days of your food diary. Okay, moving into the discussion, it's really important that you try and stick to this 7 to 900 word limit. Try not to go over or under that. Preferably not under, maybe slightly over. Again, we can negotiate that if you are over. Okay, so it's really important that you show off your knowledge. So you need to show off how well you can analyze and evaluate your data. So for dot point one, compare and comment on your predicted results to those of your actual diet. Talk about specifically, did you consume enough carbohydrates? Why? Did you consume enough protein? Again, explain why. Maybe relate it back to your 3 days of food diary. And you could say, well, I actually consumed enough protein because on my 3 days I had meat for at least one meal in those 3 days. You also need to comment and discuss whether your diet actually meets the recommended daily intakes for your age and gender, and you also need to justify your reasons. So if you say no, can you please explain why? Moving on to dot point two, comment on the amount of energy you receive for each of the 3 days from carbohydrates, fats, and proteins compared to the RDI range. This is where you look at, firstly, you need to talk about the types of carbohydrates that you consume. So we know we have simple and complex carbohydrates. You should be, if you're wanting to have a healthy diet, be mostly consuming complex carbohydrates. So if you're mostly consuming simple carbohydrates, then you could be improving, but it's also about your energy as well. When looking at your breakdown of your energy received from proteins, you should also look at complete versus incomplete proteins. Does most of your protein consumption come from vegetables and legumes and grains, or does it come from animal products? Now, also with fats, have a look at where your fats come from. Are you getting your fats mainly from healthy fats, which are your unsaturated poly and mono fats, or are you getting them from your unhealthy fats, which is your saturated fats? Now, you also need to comment on whether these fall within the recommended limits. You should only be consuming 10% of the fat that you consume should be saturated fat. So that's one thing that you can comment on. And you should be referring back to your graphs, including the hand-drawn one. So when you talk about your consumption of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, about where the energy comes from, You can refer back to graphs 1, 2, and 3, where you can see the breakdown of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins from the pie graph that we generated in the previous tutorial. You then need to compare and comment on your daily kilojoule intake for the 3 days compared to the average energy intake for a person of your age and gender. Now, that is generated by Chronometer. So your average energy intake for a person of your age and gender is your estimated energy requirement, which is not calculated in food choices. I will be creating a document on how to calculate that, uh, and I will put that in the weekly work and where you can find it and then compare that to how much energy you're actually, or how much energy you should be consuming based on your activity, and then compare that to how much you're actually eating over those 3 days. So then you need to comment on the 3 macronutrients that you are either deficient in or consume in excess. Now, please don't do what I had students do last year where they commented on macronutrients rather than micronutrients, and I had no choice but to give them 0 marks for that section. So it's micronutrients. Now, you also need to discuss possible consequences of continued deficiencies or excess consumption of these nutrients. So you can choose any micronutrients, it's completely up to you. And I would use the RGI graph to work out how much. So for example, vitamin C you will tend to consume way too much of. However, vitamin C is a water-soluble vitamin, which means that it is excreted in your urine and buildup does not occur like your fat-soluble vitamins. So consuming too much vitamin C isn't really dangerous unless you're eating vitamin C tablets like lollies, and then you can get some side effects that aren't very desirable. Okay, so you then need to recommend foods that could address any inadequacies or overconsumption for the micronutrients mentioned above. So if one of your micronutrient deficiencies is calcium, you might want to suggest some examples of where you could consume calcium from. Don't just talk about dairy products, maybe talk about other food products that do contain calcium that are not, for someone that may be lactose intolerant. You then need to identify specific strategies for improving your overall diet. So if you are consuming a lot of simple carbohydrates, maybe you should talk about some complex carbohydrates that you could consume instead. You may need to increase your intake of healthy fats in comparison to unhealthy fats. And you can do this by consuming X food at breakfast or lunch. So please be specific when identifying improvements to your overall diet. You then need to comment on reliability and usefulness of the task undertaken. So was it useful to you to actually look at what you're eating, and has it actually changed the way that you think about what you should and shouldn't be eating? Was it reliable? So, were all the foods that you entered into Chronometer available, or did you have to use another brand because they didn't have that brand available? Because this program is quite new, it should be reliable in terms of the newest technology in working out what's in food. And just, do you think it was reliable? You then need to comment on the overall strengths and weaknesses of the practical. So some strengths could include that the program was easy to use. A weakness could be that you weren't able to generate graphs yourself through the program. You had to then go into Excel and do that yourself, or any other types of strengths or weaknesses. You then need to include a conclusion. So this is, what have you learnt from the practical? Compare your original predictions with your actual results. In conclusion, and how easy would it be to modify your diet if you needed to? If you have a calcium deficiency and you're lactose intolerant, maybe it wouldn't be very easy to modify your diet. And what barriers might there be in life that may prevent modifications? So, if you need to consume more healthy fat, omega-3 and omega-6, you might not be able to afford fish, and that may limit how. Convenience is also another one as well. It's often really hard to organize food throughout the day or in preparation for the next day because you may not have enough time. It's also, if you've got a health issue as well, that might limit what you can eat. Okay, so you do need to have a reference list and you should have at least 6 different sources. So Chronometer is one because that's where you generated all of your information from. The textbook, the Essentials book, if you've got one of those, Better Health and Nutrition Australia, which is on Moodle, and any of the essential readings that are in the weekly work. Now, if you do have any questions about this that I have not answered in this, please ask me during class, and I will be going through this again next week, next lesson, and probably just going through anything that I may have missed. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.